and for your partnership in ensuring Michiganders were safe and our elections were secure this year. Today, we are celebrating a very successful election. It began by the celebration of a successful early in-person voting period all throughout our state. As we know already, before the polls even opened, 3.3 million Michiganders had voted in this election. And then throughout today, the final day to vote in this election, we saw citizens all across the political spectrum show up proudly to cast their vote in this historic election and participate in our democracy. My morning started with a dance party at my local precinct here in Detroit. And then as I traveled to polling places all throughout the state, I encountered enthusiastic, joyful gatherings of voters who were excited to participate in this election. You know, Michiganders stepped up and showed up today. And I was particularly inspired by the number of moms and dads who made it a family affair, bringing their young kids with them to vote and prepare these future voters to proudly inherit our democracy. You know, one government teacher in Cadillac brought his entire class of students with him to witness the voting process. And I saw more young people show up than I ever remember seeing in any election cycle, many of whom were excited to vote in their first election ever. Nearly 22,000 Michiganders registered and voted today, many of them under the age of 30. And not to be outdone, some septuagenarians were also first-time voters today, and others who showed up in their 90s had been voting in every election since they turned 18. Those were the winners of this election. They are our success story. The record-breaking number of Michiganders who cast ballots and the clerks and election workers whose efforts made it possible for them to do so. That's our victory, and that's what we're celebrating tonight. Now, we'll know more in the coming days and hours about how this election turned out. But as of right now, we know we are on track for record-breaking turnout in this election. We already know more than 3.4 million votes were cast throughout the mail or early voting process, including the mail-in ballots received today. And of the 2.3 million ballots that were sent to voters who voted from home, 94% were already returned as of 7:30 p.m. tonight, and the vast majority of those had been processed and fed into the tabulators before today, with the rest expected to be tallied in the coming hours as clerks check in the final ones submitted to their offices that were submitted to their offices before 8 p.m. today. So we'll know for sure in the hours ahead how many Michiganders turned out to vote in person today, but we expect it was at least as many who showed up 4 years ago. And from our team members across the state, we know that things also went smoothly in precincts across Michigan. Any issues were minor and resolved quickly and were not widespread but isolated. Polling places were by and large calm and efficient and energetic. People were excited to vote today. The tireless work of more than 1,600 local clerks and thousands of election workers all across the state made those celebrations possible, made that pride possible. And, you know, let me just say something about our clerks for 1 second. They have adapted to a plethora of new voting laws in record-breaking speed. They implemented new processes. They stood strong against attempts to sow confusion and doubt on the integrity of their work, and did it all with a smile and with pride to be participating in this historic election. So that's what we're celebrating tonight. It's no question that our democracy has prevailed because of the people in the process today and the voters who took advantage of their options to vote in this election. Now, it may take a few more hours before we know for sure the results of this presidential election here in Michigan. I'm hopeful that we will be the first of the 7 battleground states to announce our unofficial results, and we'll know that more in the hours ahead. But we're on track to have those results by tomorrow, if not sooner. Already every ballot voted in person and cast today has been tabulated. And while over 94% of the ballots voted from home were returned, there are still thousands that are left to be processed and are being processed and tabulated as we speak. There are another 6,000 ballots still outstanding from military and overseas voters. And under our law, as long as those ballots are postmarked by today, they will still count as long as they are received by Tuesday, November 12th. So with those 6,000 ballots outstanding, it may determine some of the closer races in our state, but the bottom line is we have a clear process under the law to make sure every eligible vote is counted. And that process takes time. Election workers across our state are processing, verifying, and counting ballots, and they're double checking the totals before reporting them to the public. That will take as long as it needs to take in order to ensure we are delivering complete and accurate results. Nevertheless, thanks to the remarkable efficiency of our clerks and election workers, tonight there are no reports of long lines of voters remaining across the state, and there are no disruptions or fires, literally or metaphorically, to put out, and our tabulation process is going even more efficiently than expected. For example, in Flint, only 1,000 mail-in ballots remain to be processed and tabulated tonight. I just came from Huntington Place in Detroit, where workers there finished tabulating every ballot received before 4 p.m. today, and the process to tabulate the remaining few thousand ballots over the next few hours will unfold more smoothly and efficiently than I think we had anticipated going into today. It shows that their preparation and their pre-processing really worked to ensure a smooth process this year. If you've been to Huntington Place today, as many have, you observe, to the extent that there are law enforcement there, they are there only to observe and protect the people who are protecting democracy. And whether it's observers or challengers from either side of the aisle, or people, election workers tabulating ballots, everyone is following the rules. Everyone is respecting each other. Everyone is observing the process or being a part of the process. And as a result, we're seeing the smooth and efficient, secure tabulation of those absentee ballots in Detroit. And even in Warren, I am told there are only a few thousand mail-in ballots remaining to count, even though they just began doing that today. So to ensure this efficiency continues, we do want everyone to respect this process. It's critical in these next few hours as the work to protect and tabulate the voice of our voters is done. We want to ensure that every valid ballot is counted and that we give space to everyone working to do that work. At the same time, we don't want to give space to anyone who attempts to make premature declarations about the outcome of the election in Michigan, be it a candidate, a news outlet, or an unverified rumor on social media. We need to ensure that all votes are tabulated to ensure the democratic process unfolds as the voters intend and the law stipulates. So while it is possible there will be races or ballot questions where results, even minimal returns, are clear, the vigilance that we must hold will be critical in any question of a close race. And I'm relying on the media and voters alike in partnership with my office and out of respect for the will of the voters and the work of the volunteers tabulating these ballots to stand tonight with us. We have been and will continue to be entirely transparent during this process to ensure that when misinformation, if it is spread, it is quickly recognized for what it is, an attempt to undermine confidence in our system and sow seeds of doubt about the outcome. Make no mistake, when we have any results to share, it will be because they are the clear and unequivocal will of the voters. This is an incredible day for Michigan, and this is an incredible day for our nation. My thanks to clerks and staff all across the state who worked long and difficult hours over the last several months preparing for today. Their preparation paid off in a smooth and successful election, and I'm grateful to so many members of my team here tonight who helped facilitate that work all throughout the state, all day today, and the many partners we have had along the way, from our faith leaders to, yes, our sports teams. And that's one of the reasons why we're here in Ford Field tonight, to really emphasize how important these partnerships were, from faith leaders to sports leaders to business leaders to law enforcement and our Attorney General, all of whom share with us a belief that our democracy is at its strongest when every voice is heard and when every vote is counted. Finally, I want to thank the millions of voters who participated in our democracy this election. Just like our Lions, you have made winners of all of us. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. Go ahead.
Darylyn Horn with WWJ. Were there any instances of any issues or any misinformation spread today? And if so, how was that addressed?
Yeah, one of the candidates, the former president, said there was a strong law enforcement present in Philadelphia and Detroit. That was not true. We quickly debunked it. To the extent that other people were upset, it was usually just because they couldn't get one of these stickers. We saw some of them sold on eBay, which I don't recommend. But at the same time, we also made these stickers available at our Secretary of State branch offices for the rest of this week. But no, in all seriousness, we didn't see many serious or credible issues throughout the day. There were, as we talked about earlier, some threats that had been called in, bomb threats that had been called in for locations, as well as our office in Lansing. Those were investigated and found to be not credible and sourced to Russia, as the incidents in Georgia were as well. But none of these issues led to anyone not being able to vote, which was our focus throughout the day. And I'm really glad that election workers made sure we weren't distracted by misinformation, and the voters weren't either. Yeah.
There were some issues that the ACLU. Kara Berg with the Detroit News. There were some issues of voter intimidation brought up by the ACLU in Oakland County. Is this something that you're aware of, and are you doing anything to address that?
We've been working with partners throughout the state to investigate any claims of intimidation or even intentional confusion of voters, and we'll be there to help assist any partners who want to further an investigation. But we've seen no credible reports of anyone being stopped from voting or in other ways blocked from participating in the process. Hi, ML. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks. Madam Secretary, can you compare and contrast what the scene was like in 2020 with what you've seen tonight?
Well, you were just there with me in Huntington Place, and we were remarking on how different it was than 4 years ago tonight. 4 years ago this week, in 2020, we saw a crowd in Huntington Place, then Cobo Hall, of challengers not respecting election workers, hovering over them, in some cases even threatening to interfere with the tabulation of valid votes. It was quite unconscionable and scary for a lot of people there. And it, of course, escalated throughout the week, in particular once the unofficial results of Michigan voters became known and clear. Contrasted that to tonight, where everyone is respecting each other. There's lots of space. There are observers and there are challengers, and they are there doing their duty and job as well to make sure things go smoothly, but they're not crossing any lines. They're not intimidating anyone. They're respecting the process and respecting each other. And that's really great to see. Yes, 4 years ago, there was a story that stayed with me in Macomb, where you had people in the beginning of the day arguing over their respective candidates for president that they wanted. This was back in 2020. But by the end of the day, they had all seen each other's similarities and were singing God Bless America together. In some ways, that incident is a metaphor for what we've seen over the contrast of these two elections. In 2020, at this moment, there was more disruption in Detroit. Now we're not seeing that disruption. We're seeing peace. We're seeing smooth and efficient tabulation. We're seeing and expecting results to be available earlier than they were in 2020 due to the pre-processing available to those workers. So I'm really glad. It really shows how strong, resilient, and how much our election officials have persevered through the last few years and made our election system stronger and better through what we've come through together.
What do you attribute the difference to?
I think the two things that have led to the differences I just explained were preparation. I mean, we've spent the last few years preparing for today, all of us, building partnerships, working with faith leaders to keep the peace, working with election workers to ensure they knew the rules, and working to invite people into the process so that they could understand how secure it is. That was our preparation. And then pre-processing. Part of the challenge of last year was there were 3 million ballots that election workers had to process and tabulate today. Now there were 3 million ballots, but they were tabulated and processed over the course of the early voting period. That created much more space and much less anxiety, and I think just took the temperature down a lot more than we saw in 2020. So I'm really grateful because the proof was in the results that we saw today, and I'm hopeful that that peace, that serenity, that respect of the process and the respect that people on both sides of the aisle are showing each other and to democracy itself will hold in the days and months ahead.
Joey Caplletti with
Yeah.
AP. Can you elaborate a little bit on, you say you debunked the former president's claims. Is there just no truth to that? And then, kind of a follow-up. Are you concerned at all that the former president is already making, as you're saying, false claims before polls were even closed? Are you concerned about that later tonight?
Well, I think the first thing I've tried to make clear is that candidates don't declare who wins elections, voters do. And so we'll remind any candidates who try to make premature declarations of victory in the hours or days ahead that they're not the ones who gets to decide who wins. It'll be the unofficial tallies and votes in battleground in all states around the country. And that's what we're focused on delivering for the nation today here in Michigan. But secondly, yes, if there are either candidates or other bad actors or even foreign bad actors who try to continue to inject confusion or fear or sow seeds of doubt about the sanctity of our elections in the hours and days ahead, we'll be there to speak the truth and ensure people know what is actually happening. And if I could go back to comparing where we are now in 2024 and 2020. In 2020, we saw an uptick in misinformation leading to many threats of election officials that we've endured in the years since. And of course, a lot unfolded in the months following that election year, or that election day. What we've seen now, however, in 24 is not necessarily a reduction in that misinformation, but an increase in people prepared to fight it. An increase in people like faith leaders and business leaders and sports teams who have come together to help us whack every mole that comes up. And that's been a real success story. And it's, I think, one of the ways we've been able to more swiftly respond to misinformation and debunk it quickly, because there's so many of us with eyes on the process and with an awareness of how far people might go to sow seeds of doubt and a willingness to defend the truth about our process at every step of the way. Yeah.
Madam Secretary, Aaron Davis with the Washington Post.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate at all on the 4 sites that there were bomb threats made? Similar to, we've heard from Secretary of State in Georgia that those were predominantly in heavily Democratic areas. Was there a similar profile to those 4 spots, and can you be more specific about those?
Yeah, you can argue that. I mean, there were 4 voting locations and then our office in Lansing as well. We look at them more as swatting attempts of sort of accusations that something bad was happening in these locations, and then when upon investigation there wasn't. One of the differences, though, as I saw things unfold and talked to officials in Georgia and versus what happened here, is that we didn't see any disruptions of the voting process as a result of these attempted bomb threats. And that's really, I think, speaks to the success of our election workers who just kept making sure things went smoothly. And that was really great to see. And that, again, was our focus. Make sure we protect the ability of people to vote and then also counter the misinformation and keep everyone safe.
Thanks. And was there specific evidence that did tie that to foreign actors that you saw?
Yeah. According to our sources with law enforcement, the roots of the same threats from Russia to Georgia, the state of Georgia, were rooted as well in the threats here in Michigan.
Sarah Schultz with Local 4. Did we get a bunch of first-time voters who registered today?
There you are. Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Did we get a
Yes.
bunch of first-time voters who registered today? And overall, how would you rate the turnout for this election?
Yeah, we saw nearly 22,000 Michiganders register and vote today. The exact number was 21,754. We'll have more details on the demographics and locations in the days ahead of those numbers. In the past, it's been usually 6 communities, particularly Ann Arbor, East Lansing, Detroit, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, and Dearborn, where we've seen that. That's in past years. We'll do that breakdown in the days ahead to get more of that information. And your second question was turnout. I mean, I as I've said already, turnout was through the roof today and throughout this election. Really started, as Pastor Bland was saying, with the early voting process. You know, when we worked over these last few years since 2022 to prepare for early voting in this election, our biggest concern was that people wouldn't know that you could vote early. And a lot of our research leading into today showed that in some cases half of the voting population didn't know you could vote early. And now we're facing a scenario where 1.2 million Michiganders actually did vote early in person in this election, which speaks to our success in educating voters about this option, and I think really changes the culture of voting in our state and will change the culture of voting in our state for years to come. I think given that we're now in the third of 3 back-to-back high turnout elections in our state, and we're potentially looking at the highest turnout election in state's history once all is said and done. Given all of that, with the early voting process and period, it has undoubtedly made voting more convenient in our state, and I think that's why we're also seeing a lot of new voters show up this year. We announced earlier that about 15% or so, maybe more, of the people who voted early were new voters, were first-time voters, and we saw a lot of people showing up today who were new voters or first-time voters as well. That's our goal every year, to get more people voting, to get more first-time voters in the process, and early voting was a big reason why we were able to, I think, do that so well this year.
Secretary Benson, Orlando Brand Williams, excuse my voice, with the New York Times. Just a clarification, 2.3 million mail-in ballots and 94% of them came back.
No,
To be counted.
2.3 is the 94% that have been returned. Yes.
been returned.
So there were 3.2, sorry, let me get those exact numbers for you I'm looking for. And we can get those specific numbers for you. There were 2.3 million ballots sent to voters, and of that, 2.12 have been returned. The total number of ballots sent to voters was 2.3 million. Of that, 94% have been returned. Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Well, going into today, we were at 3.3 million. 1.2 million through early, 2.1 through absentee. And so for today, if we had 2 million or more participating, which is what we had in 2020, then we would be at about between 5 and 5.5 million. We'll know more tomorrow morning what those exact numbers are. But anecdotally, we saw both long lines and fast moving lines at every precinct I visited today, and many of our staff visited. So that would suggest to me that we perhaps had more people turn out on election day than we did in 2020. And if that does turn out to be the case, then we will have broken the early voting, the total voting turnout record in Michigan in recent history. So we'll know more tomorrow. I think we'll do another press conference in the morning with those specific numbers. But every data point I'm seeing suggests we're on track to break that 2020 record. We don't know yet. We'll get that as soon as we know those numbers. We'll be able to run them for you. But the way I'm looking at it now is, going into Election Day in 2020, 3.3 million citizens had already voted. Similarly, going into this Election Day, 3.3 had already voted. And so the question is, did the same number of people vote today that voted on Election Day in 2020? It appears to be yes, perhaps even more. And that's what gives me sense that we are on track to break that record. Other questions?